Hello, everybody, and thanks for coming to another one of Leeds Helpful Tips live streams. Realize we had kind of a little bit of a late start today, so thanks for sticking around. As with always, these live streams are absolutely live, and so sometimes things happen, and if they do, don't worry, we'll get the signal back. And one of those things that's happened actually is, unfortunately, today I do not have my camera functional. So the day of the most exciting topic, all about grants, I don't have a camera, so hopefully, though, this will still be helpful. Just maybe not a lot of dynamic things to look at, but we'll get there. So today's topic is on grants. One of the neat things, really quick before we dive into it, is with YouTube live stream, we have the ability to have chat. So if you have any questions during this live stream, you can always use the chat box, and you can please feel free to fill anything out. So one of the things that Leeds has been working on over the years, a lot of our customers purchase their equipment from us from one way or another through grants. And so that's where this live stream really came about. Is I was talking to a couple of our salespeople at Leeds and a couple of our customers, and the thought was to just kind of put out everything that we know about grants and the grant process. Because while some labs are very good and they write a lot of grants and they get a lot of grants, there are also lots of labs that don't necessarily pursue the grants, whether it's because of a time constraint or knowledge about what grants are even available to them. So forensics is kind of interesting in that, here's my helpful Venn diagram in the background. Forensics is kind of interesting because it's a nexus, or it's the center portion between science, politics, and the legal system. And it's kind of interesting too in that forensic scientists have to thread that needle, I guess, and tread that line in balancing all three of those, of us doing good science, working in the legal system, and also working in a political area. But that's another topic for another day. The important part here is that by being involved, by having this nexus point between science, the legal system, and politics, that there are some interesting funding sources available to forensic scientists, and varied funding sources in grants that are available to forensic scientists that are to me, very interesting, and maybe sometimes you wouldn't expect it. Like a great example is if you work at a crime lab that is associated with a police department, so following under that legal system aspect, you may have access to grants that another laboratory which is not underneath the police department does not have would have access to. And so it's kind of interesting is that laboratories, beyond just building their own budgets, trying to fund themselves through for service, there are grants that are available running from either science, legal, or political that can be really beneficial to apply. There are grants out there. How do you get them? There are basically, from what we've learned, there are two types of grants that are available. And we'll go through some examples in a moment. But the two types of grants are competitive-based grants and formulaic-based grants. Competitive-based grants are literally a pitch. You or the laboratory would write a need. You'd look at the grant, you'd write a need, and make a pitch, a very compelling pitch. So this is where our customers that have been most effective find their most eloquent writer and put them in charge of it. And a competitive-based grant is you make a pitch to the grant provider on why you would need the funding to do whatever. These are the grants that really shine where writing and then being very specific and competitive writing come into play. There's another type of grant that are formulaic grants. And formulaic grants are kind of interesting in that it basically runs off of a formula. Any lab that applies is given funding. And so it might seem fairly straightforward, like, oh, hey, here's my formula grant. I'm going to hit all the check boxes. Does my lab do this? Does my lab do that? Are we ISO certified? Things like that. Please give us money. And it seems very easy. But the reality is that formulaic grants can also have a lot of stipulations. And they also can have reporting and also doling out clauses. So a really good example of a competitive and formulaic grant option is actually the Paul Coverdale grant. what I have up in front is the Paul Coverdell Forensic Science Improvement Grant. Essentially, the Paul Coverdell grant, many laboratories, I suspect all laboratories will be familiar with it, is it's a run through this organization called the Bureau of Justice Assistance. And essentially what it is to improve forensic science. And the Paul Coverdell grant is a large enough grant that it actually has two different types of the Paul Coverdell grant. There's a formulaic version, and then there's a competitive-based version. What's really interesting is, to my understanding, is that the formulaic version is issued to states. So let's say we're based in Minnesota. The state of Minnesota is given, and if anybody hears from Minnesota, they can absolutely correct me, is the state of Minnesota is formulaically given money off of this grant, and then is up to the state to issue those funds to the agencies that the state feels needs the funding the most to improve those forensic science programs. But what that means is, while it's formulaic, it doesn't necessarily, as a small agency, you wouldn't necessarily be able to apply and get funded. You would have to negotiate and work through the state. What's interesting, but at the same time, is, let's say you're a small agency, the Paul Coverdell grant also has a competitive version of their grant. And what's very interesting with Paul Coverdell, and I've actually talked to a couple labs that weren't aware of this, is the competitive version of the Coverdell grant a local agency can apply for, even if their state is getting given money from the formulaic grant. If you're a small agency, you are a small laboratory, and you've struck out in the past about Coverdell funds, know that there is a competitive portion of the Coverdell grant, and it is even written in the Coverdell description, or the grant description, that local agencies can apply directly and they don't need to go through the state. So that's something that's kind of interesting to keep in mind, and is a really good way to show the differences between formulaic and competitive-based grants. There's two types of grants. Well, there's two types of styles of grants. The question is, how do you even find out about the grants? Because, like I said before, the thing with forensics is you work across a spectrum of science grants, legal grants, and political-based funding sources. So how do you find out, how do you gain access or even know about what grants are available? And that's where it's actually it's helpful in that there are two main web pages that I highly suggest anyone who's interested in go to. The first one is the BJA, and you can see it up here. You can see the address. You can just Google the BJA, Bureau of Justice Assistance, and one of the things you can do is you can sign up for any notifications of any requests for proposals. And these proposals, in my experience, will usually go out in the spring with awards, so like in April, May. So there'll be a request for proposal notification that goes out in maybe, let's say, February or March, that is due in spring. And then these awards will be made actually right about this time in October, with the funding actually be given around the start of the year. So I recommend going to BJA and signing up for any of their notifications on grants. And BJA, Bureau of Justice Assistance, was made to really consolidate, from my understanding, a lot of the different types of grants. So, for example, there's a DNA grant called the CBER, the Capacity Enhancement for Backlog Reduction. That's underneath BJA. There's the whole plethora of grants called Justice Assistance Grants. Those are underneath the BJA. Project Safe Neighborhoods grants, those are underneath BJA. And so by signing up for BJA, you can get a lot of good notifications. And I mentioned those three grants, JAG, Project Safe Neighborhoods, the Capacity Enhancement, because these are grants that our customers have used in part to build their program and purchase equipment from us. Quick note though, you can't actually write a grant to buy a piece of equipment. You write a grant to help your program, and if it happens that you need equipment to help with that specific grant or with that specific project, you can get funded that way. So BJA go there, sign up for their notifications. In the probably this, I would expect we're going to start seeing some notifications go out anywhere from now into the beginning of the year, February, about new funding sources. So I highly recommend that. Another big one to look at is the NIJ, National Institute of Justice. Maybe some of the people who are here will know more about the relationship between NIJ, National Institute of Justice, and BJA, Bureau of Justice Assistance. I believe BJA spun out of the NIJ. But NIJ is also a website I'd recommend going to because historically they have published lots and lots of grants. And again, usually these requests for proposals will go out in like early spring, February, May, March, with awards coming out in October and then funds being released in January. NIJ, sign up for their funding awards or for their notifications. That's a big one. You know, there's a couple other grants. I guess what it comes down to is not necessarily think creatively, but because of how forensics touches so many of these different topics, science, politics, and the legal system, I suggest trying to sign up for BJA and NIJ grants and getting notifications as much as possible. Because while you might not think at first, well, there's no grant for what my lab does, you might be surprised and there might be a grant that comes out. For example, NIJ has these research and development grants that come out. And these research and development grants are there sometimes for laboratories to improve a process. And so you might be able to write a grant around that. Just a couple more quick things to show. We've had some labs. This is more for firearms. But we've had some labs use the high-intensity drug trafficking areas run through the DEA. And this kind of goes back to my little Venn diagram. We're showing that the legal system and politics and kind of pull into play for forensic science because our customers have been able to make compelling cases as part of the HIDA grants that gun crime and drug crime are both related strongly together. And so that's if you are a firearm examiner and you are in this area of targeting that HIDA is interested in helping, the HIDA grant could be a good opportunity if you need funding assistance. And then, yeah, there's always more grants that are coming out. For example, I just found out one in Ohio called Relentless Pursuit Grant, and that's a grant that's run through the Justice Department. Hopefully this is helpful. Again, just going back to my kind of dorky Venn diagram, forensics really does operate within the science, legal, and political spectrum. And because of that, there might be some good funding sources through these grants. But I guess to summarize, sign up on the NIJ Grants webpage. You'll get emails whenever anything's coming out. And sign up on the BJA webpage, and you'll get notifications. And then be willing to think kind of creatively. Look at the HIDA grants if you're a firearm examiner, and just kind of keep an eye out. And know that even if you're a small agency, you can go after these grants. These competitive grants in particular, a lot of them were made for agencies that are smaller that need support. That's all I got today. Again, apologies about the camera issues. I realize looking at web pages and Venn diagrams is not the most engaging talk. But please feel free to let me know if you have any questions. jkurth@leedsmicro.com.